The Defense of Marriage Act of 1996, otherwise known as DOMA, gave the right of the states to refuse a marriage license to any same-sex couple. It also defined marriage as a legal union between one man and one woman, and defined spouse as a person of the opposite sex who is a husband or a wife. The fight for same-sex marriage and overall equality began a long time before it was ever publicly acknowledged in any sort of government setting. For example, the Stonewall riots of 1969 are a perfect example of LGBT individuals fighting for basic human decency amongst the U.S. During Stonewall, members of the queer community fought back against police brutality that was discriminatory towards them. However, it wasn't until Baker v. Nelson and a few other landmark cases that same-sex marriage became a hot topic and later on a serious legal issue. Baker v. Nelson began in 1972 when Richard John Baker and James Michael McConnell applied for a marriage license in Minneapolis from a court clerk by the name of Gerald R. Nelson. After denying them the marriage license under the state's law which prohibited same-sex marriage, Baker and McConnell took it to the state court, in which again they were denied. Finally, they appealed to the Supreme Court, in which they agreed with the previous rejections and first defined the term marriage as it would be later written in DOMA. Many years later, beginning in 1993 as Bayer versus Lewin, Nina Bayer sued the state of Hawaii for refusing a marriage license to her and her wife. The state of Hawaii had agreed with her and began investigating the reasons as to why same-sex couples were denied a basic human right. When they discovered that the reasons lacked merit, this court case later became known as Bayer versus Mike in 1996, the same year as DOMA was put into effect, and began advocating for same-sex couples and their right to marry. The end of this case resulted in Hawaii's constitution no longer protecting the rights of gay and lesbian individuals other than their freedom to marry. However, this landmark case pushed along the idea of same-sex marriage to the point where it was just beginning to become normalized in society. Ever since DOMA had been put into act, many states had legalized same-sex marriage on their own. However, in the case U.S. versus Windsor, gay rights had a lot more to do with marital benefits rather than marriage itself. Edith Windsor and Thea Clara Spire were married in Canada but had resided in New York, where under state law their marriage was recognized. After Spire passed away in 2009, she had left her entire estate to Windsor. However, there was no marital exemption for the taxes she would have to pay because the U.S. did not recognize their marriage under federal law. Windsor took her case to the Supreme Court and declared that DOMA was unconstitutional, and she won. In response, Article 3 of DOMA, which defined the terms marriage and spouse, were struck down. While approximately 8 million people in the U.S., making up 3.5% of the population, are lesbian, gay, or bisexual, it is a wonder that only 37 states and the District of Columbia legalized gay marriage by early June of 2015. So many people began to oppose DOMA by this time and label it as discriminatory and unconstitutional due to it often doing more harm than good towards U.S. citizens. However, on June 26, 2015, Obergefell v. Hodges went to the Supreme Court with a 5-4 ruling. They legalized same-sex marriage nationwide and struck down DOMA once and for all. Being alive during a historical event such as granting the right of marriage equality is legendary. While same-sex marriage is truly beneficial to gay, lesbian, and bisexual individuals, just these alone don't make up the entirety of the queer community, and we still have a long ways to go before people are not discriminated against because of their sexual orientation or gender identity. However, DOMA and eventually Obergefell v. Hodges are laying down the pavement for what is to come in terms of human rights in the U.S., and it is incredible to witness history being made right before our eyes.